For our COBT viewers and listeners, it's Maynard, Mike, and Jeff here with a special week of the 4th of July edition. We've got George Bilicic with us today. He's here in the Houston office. He's the vice chairman and the global head of power, energy, and infrastructure at Lazard. He's a great friend, and he's a great person to talk to right now in this world of ever-changing power discussions and everything that's happening. Also, Lazard just came out with their very well-known LCOE report. This is version 17, I think. So this is something that's been around quite a long time. George is going to give us some highlights, but then we're going to jump in, talk about the report, talk about everything that's happening in power. So, George, thanks so much for joining us.
Great. It's great to be here with you. You've got a fabulous organization, and look forward to contributing to your efforts today. So we published a study. We do it every year for the last 18 years, other than 1 year when during COVID we didn't publish it. And this year's study is pretty interesting. It says a few things that are notable. First, it shows a widening of the range of renewable costs. The lower end of the range is higher for the first time in any of our studies, but it generally shows that renewables costs are stabilized in this high inflationary environment. The second thing it shows, which our study has always shown, is that we need to use all forms of energy in the generation resource stack. So natural gas, nuclear, energy efficiency as a fuel source, renewables of all types, and then energy storage. The third thing the study shows is the cost profile of energy storage, which is dramatically scaled. And we can see how the scaling is benefiting costs, although the soft costs around storage projects has filled in some of those cost reductions. And the fourth thing that's pretty interesting in the study is we're tracking hydrogen. There's less hype around hydrogen than there had been, largely because the green hydrogen market hasn't developed. But we can look at the cost components of hydrogen and see how that business is going to scale and costs will go down if the green hydrogen market develops. We also do not, in this study, try to cost out new nuclear. We really wanted to do it this year, but the data sources just were not reliable. We think nuclear will be a big part of the future. So I'll just flag a couple slides here, and it's worth in looking at our study to read our memo. It's on our website. It's embedded in this study. But this first slide, it shows the levelized cost of energy across different generation types. And what you see at the wind and storage, wind onshore, solar PV, utility scale, and we look at it against existing nuclear power generation, gas generation, the costs are all in the same ballpark. And so what this tells us is that if you're doing a resource plan from scratch, or you're looking to add generation or deal with this data center demand dynamic, it's always going to make sense to include renewables in your resource plan. But we don't have the ability to use renewables around the clock. You can't fill it in with storage, so you have to use some other things. And what we see in the study in the gas category here is an increased capacity factor, which tells us that what is happening is existing generation is being used more robustly. So that's what you would take from this slide. And by the way, our study is all US data. It's unsubsidized, but then here we run the subsidies through it, and you can see the benefits of the IRA and the other tax benefits. Elements of the IRA have not been fully implemented, but the tax regime in this country has always been inducing investment into renewables and reducing the costs, but not as dramatically as one thinks. I mean, the generic person might say costs are being reduced by 50%, 100%, and it's a smaller percentage than that. But you can see how the renewable assets cost down because of the benefits of the tax code. And then I would go to this is a pretty good study. Our pretty good part of our study. Sometimes people are wondering about the cost of capital we use in the study. We've kept it constant for the entire study. Obviously, cost of capital has changed, but it's very easy to sensitize for cost of capital and capital structure. because there's much more leverage used in a lot of these projects than we assume. And so over time, it's been very easy to sensitize for this. And then if you, this is a slide that we added, or a part of our study that we added last year. It's pretty interesting. What we do here to try to show, if you are trying to treat renewables as having a capacity value, and you're using what the relevant reliability organization declares to be necessary for renewables to have capacity value treatment, this is what happens to the costs. So in nearly all the regions other than California, the firming source of energy is gas-fired generation, except in California where it's batteries. And this increases the costs, of course, because you're layering on top of it another generation source, but still quite competitive against gas and peaking gas. We also use a gas commodity cost of $3.45, which we've kept the same through our whole study. So obviously gas is cheaper right now. That would reduce the cost of the gas-fired generation. An important nuance here is that this is what the reliability organization is prescribing. This is not necessarily what the market is prescribing. And this doesn't tell you that someone is going to be making the investment decision in renewables based on this calculation. And this is the historic cost ramp on renewables, different renewable sources against gas-fired generation and other resources. And you can see, over time, a dramatic decline in costs. It would be absurd to think you're going to see this kind of decline over time now in the future because we've gotten to such low costs. But it supports this idea that every generation resource planning decision should include an evaluation of renewables. And then, we have this storage study, which, is, as I said at the beginning, quite interesting because it is showing that the capital costs, the cost of storage has gone, that component of the cost of storage has gone down. But, behind this slide, we can see the soft costs, the EPC costs, installation costs have gone up. And we would expect this area to ramp down over time, subject to what happens with the import, the tariff situation. This slide is interesting, and the slides before it are as well. We looked at different case studies for storage, just to see, is it economic to do storage? And there remains a bit of confusion around storage because to understand how storage works, you have to look at all the different revenue layers that support an energy storage project to figure out what the IRR of the relevant project is, unless it's just sitting in rate base, earning a return on the capital invested. And so we've looked at, and over time, we've looked at a whole host of different scenarios. And what this tells you is based on those scenarios, the returns are quite attractive based on the multiple revenue stacks. This also tells you that storage is complicated. You need to have a skill set around a storage business that involves the ability to be able to access a number of different revenue sources. And then we do this hydrogen study, which we really like, and we look at PEM and alkaline at a couple different size levels. And what we can see in the study is that the electrolyzer cost, as that component of the cost scales, will scale. The thing that's that is important to understand about this study when you look at the costs, this part of our study, is what are you comparing it to? So when we look at the levelized cost of renewable energy, we know we're comparing it to other renewable energy sources, to energy efficiency, to natural gas. And here you have to look at what the use case is. There also is ongoing implementation challenges around the IRA that affect how you think about hydrogen. But there's a slide in the very back of the study, which I won't turn to, which looks at the gas equivalent cost of hydrogen, and it is super expensive. So I might just go back. About 4 years ago, we added to our study an 80-20 blend So it's this last bar on the slide. And if you look at the far right, the $150 per megawatt hour, that is an 80-20 green hydrogen natural gas blend. So not a crazy price. We don't have subsidies in it, but it tells you how expensive it is to utilize green hydrogen right now based on the cost profile. But it's 100% going to cost down. And a driver of that is going to be the development of green hydrogen markets. If they don't develop, then this is going to be quite uninteresting from a cost perspective. And if they don't develop, some of this is merely an academic exercise. I should have made this point earlier. The nuclear calculation here is Vogtle. So this is the Southern Company Vogtle nuclear power project. And this calculation is based on a range of values based on what they disclosed. And we're going to really try hard next year to have something on nuclear. That's a quick summary of the study.
That's great. Maybe we could just jump in on nuclear because you had that comment right there. Do you think, as financial people, we're always used to discounting things and thinking that things way too out in the future just, we discount them to death, so they're not worth much. And here you have an asset that's going to be a 60+ year asset. Do you think the financial world or the energy policy world is valuing nuclear correctly? I mean, I know we have a lot of issues with how much is it really going to cost and cost overruns and all that stuff, but it seems like it's an asset that's almost by definition hard. It would be easy to undervalue it because it's going to contribute for so long.
So I have a few things on nuclear. So that's definitely a valid point. We use a longer life to value the levelized cost of energy of nuclear here for Vogtle, but these plants are 80-year plants, so it's reasonable to use a very long life to discount. Second thing is just the sheer value of having reliable, clean baseload nuclear gets lost in a world where we don't have a carbon price, and just the benefit of knowing that you've got a plant that's going to run round the clock. The thing that I think is interesting about nuclear is the services industry, like the EPC industry, the services industry to support the construction of new nuclear is very undeveloped. It used to be developed, it's very undeveloped now. And to the extent you started to get movement around particular technology types and could build momentum around the services industry and some scale and synergy benefit with the EPCs, the costs of nuclear should go down. And this is something that you could argue should be driven by our government, because our government has been involved in this before with the loan program for nuclear, but it's also an area where the government could drive investment in this area and scale. So and that's one of the issues with Vogtle is no one had built a new nuclear plant in this country for a long time. You had the TVA plant was completed, the Watts Bar plant. But there was a lot of inefficiency around how do we do this? Yeah.
And it's interesting that people don't really talk about it, but even Vogtle, which was an admitted blowout in terms of the cost, by the time they were getting to the last unit, they had, they've gotten to some much reduced costs.
That's right. That's right.
So is this another way of saying, George, when you think about this menu and you think about these flavors and how these bars might change over the next 5 to 10 years, is the nuclear bar the one that's most likely to change the most in terms of cost reduction?
Yeah, I would say the area where let me answer the question a little bit differently. Where is there the most volatility of cost estimates? I think we have to watch offshore wind. That should reduce in cost. And part of the issue with offshore wind in the US is we don't have a lot of depth in the data. And the services industry isn't well developed. I think there's a wide range of outcomes that are potentially there for nuclear, because we don't know what technology is going to be deployed ultimately, and because of the scale and cost profile topic I mentioned. And then I think there's a lot of volatility around hydrogen costs for the reasons I discussed earlier. We also have to watch. Gas is embedded here at 345. That's a pretty, I don't really expect that would be an unreasonable gas cost assumption, but as you know, gas is an incredibly volatile commodity, so we would watch that. What we don't have in here also is energy efficiency. That's been in prior studies. And energy efficiency, we took it out because energy efficiency means a million different things. But that there would be some volatility in that as well.
I was thinking about, we'll attach it because you were here with us when the last report came out.
Yep.
I was just thinking about what we were talking about then, what we're talking about now. And I mean, we could dedicate, there's probably 500 things have changed in the world since that last thing. But one of them is, and you referenced it up front, is just the bars this year relative to last year. Like, just generally speaking, power looks more expensive. However you're measuring it in any context. Is that a fair summary?
That's correct. And that's, the supply demand dynamic has moved. We have increased power demand. You can see this across all the utilities with their forecasts and what they're reporting for load growth. And it's a function of ongoing electrification, slow and steady electrification, not disintermediating gas. It's just that there's more electric power being used. Second, onshoring of manufacturing is slowly happening across the country, so more power demand. And then the data center dynamic is hitting already some of the power demand, and the economy is in pretty good shape. And then we have higher costs across. We've had inflation, so costs are higher, and those costs are hard costs, but also soft costs because it's expensive to utilize labor in this industry.
It also, well, we were talking to a good power friend yesterday, a power exec, and this individual was saying she happened to talk to the person next to her on the plane, and just the public is now aware of power in a way that the public was not a year ago. Like, from the Journal to your local newspaper, everybody knows we have a problem. That seems like the new thing.
Yeah, you see people talking about it in terms of the grid and whether the grid is reliable. And everyone's had experience with, challenging weather events that have affected reliability and the functioning of the electricity system. And then the data center dynamic is across every single newspaper, USA Today to the New York Times to the local newspaper. And people are wondering about that. And then, the utility bills for a lot of customers have gone up, and they're just aware of it because it's hitting their discretionary income.
I was thinking when you, up front, you've got a disclaimer, and my sort of read of it would be like, look, there's a lot of other stuff going on here. We're not factoring in building permits. We're not factoring in the systemic cost of things. There's a bunch of stuff. We can't possibly capture everything. But I think one of the broad-based sentiments in today's world, I think, around all this is that natural gas will, if you really need all this power and you really need it sooner rather than later, and you do face various constraints and you do need, reliable power, et cetera, I think there's a base sentiment that natural gas is going to get a real boost from the world we're living in, whether it's peaking plants or we build, new big ones. What do you think just about natural gas?
Oh, I think it's absolutely going to be a part of the solution to deal with the growing need for power supply. Existing gas plants are much more valuable now than they were when we last spoke, because of the critical nature of the natural gas plants and the function of the system. Can I
just ask you, is there something you feel in the Lazard system, like any given asset, if somebody was going to sell it, it's going to be harder to buy that asset, that value is just, you feel that in real day-to-day activities.
Yeah, the activity in the traditional generation market is completely different than it was 2 years ago. We're very active in this area, and there's a real commercial market around buying and selling these assets. And there was no one who was a buyer 2 or 3 years ago of these assets. And now we would expect to see a lot of transfer of ownership of fossil fuel generation in this country. But what needs to happen is we need to invest in gas infrastructure, which has been underinvested in, and that includes new gas infrastructure, because we have to get natural gas to the location of some of these plants. And we need to make it easier to permit things. So permitting is super important. It protects stakeholders, but it doesn't need to take this long. The country desperately needs permitting reform to address this need for infrastructure in all areas, but that includes natural gas. On top of all the natural gas, though, you will be able to layer in a lot of renewables. So, and the more renewables you do, the more natural gas you're going to need, because you need to fill the whole 24/7 resource stack.
You had that chart which was illustrating firming costs by different ISOs.
Right.
And you showed California, because you got a firm with batteries, is just much more expensive. So I think the question or point was, we keep observing, we think, in having these power conversations, that, power is the cost of your power is very much dictated by where you live, what state you're in, or what country you're in. And then we think we're noticing, the places that have just had, bad power, not bad, but they have policies that are making power more expensive. They're going to lose industry. Or, like, this is the thing we feel like we're noticing, is just the implications to the world of different power policies, different power prices, and everybody's moving to a place which has lower power. That's what it feels like. And the US is advantaged relative to maybe Europe and some other places. But then within the US, there are places that are better than worse. Is that something you feel in your franchise, with the industrial clients, with everybody who really cares about the price of power?
I think price of power is taken into account. I think what is more dominant is the tax regime and also the ease of doing business. So I, need to build new manufacturing capacity for my widget company. And it's easier for me to locate it in Texas than it is in California, because of permitting and taxes.
There's a bunch of issues before you get to the cost of power.
But cost of power is important. And also, in some ways, reliability of power is maybe will exceed cost of power in some instances. So am I going to have reliable power? Is the grid reliable? What's the climate risk also? So, if you're locating, on the Gulf Coast and it's a manufacturing facility, you need to be planning for weather events that are very different than, other parts of the country.
I've got like a half dozen questions.
Okay, good.
No, the one I really wanted to ask you about is on the executive summary, the very first point that was made there was that the bigger, well-capitalized companies with the balance sheets are probably going to capture more market share. NextEra really kind of talked about that in a recent quarterly call, that we're bigger, we're in the queues, we can do this. I guess my question is, A, that sounds correct. B, what does that mean over time for just the cost in the system? Does the cost go down because of that? Does costs go up because there are, fewer people getting better returns? And what does that mean just for the length of getting projects done? And maybe what happens to the other developers that just can't compete? Do they go away? They get swallowed up? How do you think about that?
So we think that over some block of time, next 3 to 7 years, 5 to 7 years, we're going to see a lot of horizontal mergers in this area, where the larger company, maybe you see a couple companies that are both worth $2 to $4 billion merging in almost a merger of equals. In order to be big enough and diverse enough to be public companies, because one of the things that is a real challenge in the industry is that the private markets, they're robust, they're flush with capital, but they're not well designed to fund this business. It's not efficient on average over time to keep going to the private markets to raise the capital to grow this business. The public markets are super efficient for this sector, but almost none of these companies are public companies, and they're very volatile. And part of the volatility is they're too project concentrated, and so you need to get bigger and less exposed to individual projects. What I would say, you have like sort of an antitrust debate, market power debate. What is happening? The industry is a NextEra even though their cost, they may have pricing power, but they don't have pricing power that is, in our judgment, problematic. So as the industry scales, becomes more concentrated, the end use customers are still driven, like the utilities are still driven by cost, lowest cost. And so, we would think that, that the consolidation dynamic is not problematic. And what we would think would happen in our study over time is the top end of this range goes down, lower end probably stays about the same. So you get an average that's lower. But the next era investor presentations have been really spectacular on this topic. But I think, a company, there are other companies that have scale like this in the area. And then there are some entrants from Europe that are in the United States that have that kind of scale. And they're actually able to procure in their supply chain globally to help manage costs. Yep. It's a really, really important, topic.
Right. And I was thinking about, we talked a fair bit about gas. Solar is so critical to the generation queue right now. Solar and storage just dominate, the queue. This is the second year in a row where costs are meaningfully off what was a really long-term, trend line. Costs still at good levels, but maybe talk about that inflation dynamic, interest rates, Chinese tariffs, et cetera. How do you see that cost inflation impacting the ability for the project queue to get turned into capacity?
I think there's a problem with the queue. I don't think it's a good thing that we have nothing but solar and storage in these queues. We need other kinds of resources. We need wind. We need natural gas to get in the queue, and those natural gas plants need to be able to be permitted. The delay in projects because of the queue or other delays has caused some projects to be turned upside down. It's created problems for some of the EPCs, some of the developers, some of the equipment suppliers, and then some of the end users. So the delay because of the queue or other factors is a problem. I would say we need queue reform, transmission queue reform, very badly. And then we need to make it easier. This relates to the permitting issue, but the country needs transmission, more transmission. We need to make it easier to build transmission. And transmission is just another generation resource in some ways. If we can't build it, we have an inefficient system. And for some of the states where you just can't build natural gas, you especially need transmission. So the Pacific Northwest, New York State, you need to be able to invest in transmission.
And that queue reform, is that as simple as more capital required up front to discourage kind of just flooding into the queue without a well-capitalized project? What do you think that means?
I think it means that you can't. There needs to be some examination of people who are accumulating queue positions for anti-competitive reasons or for other reasons that aren't well-founded. I think there needs to be an efficiency around editing the queue line and things of that nature. And there needs to be a focus on diversity of generation resource in the queue. I don't think there's been a really great discussion on that topic. It sort of is a subset or a sidecar to the permitting reform. But there's a company or two that has been advocating for itself by talking about what's in the queue, supporting this notion that the TAM, the total addressable market for solar, is grand and wonderful, but it's not great resource planning.
It's a fascinating concept, queue reform, so to speak, like that, because I don't know that we've talked about that. It seems like, to your point, George, maybe it makes people nervous, but you would have some sort of oversight that said, hey, we're trying to build a system here. We can't load up on, we got to think about how the system works together. So we do have some caps in some flavors to try to get a systemic outcome that's positive.
That's right. Especially with this load demand that is here and is coming, you need more organized system planning. It's a little bit disorganized and not well structured, given we start with starting with this view we have, which we need to, which is that we need diverse resources to have a well-functioning system, and that includes transmission, natural gas, wind, solar, storage, ultimately new nuclear. And if the transmission queues are all solar and storage, that can't be a good thing.
So you made a really interesting comment about the Washington State example, the New York State example, places where it just doesn't look like we're going to get new natural gas infrastructure. Well, I guess one thing we've been wondering about is as the tech companies are having to address their power needs, which is causing them to think about where they get the power, which is causing them to think about some of their commitments. And there's just a real sort of, I don't know if it's a revolution going on, but at least there's a stirring going on. Do you think we could get some changes in attitudes? You know, like Washington State, Oregon, California, places with lots of, that's like a tech community at some level. Do you think we could get some changes in attitudes in historically, we don't want gas type places as a result of just the surge in power demand that we're getting?
I think that the stakeholders, I think some stakeholders you can never persuade.
Yeah.
I think for other stakeholders, you can persuade them, but they need to understand a bunch of basics of the functioning of the electric system and some of the benefits that come with just investment in the local economies. So, you know, if you're putting a data center in a rural area in the Pacific Northwest, that is tax base for the local schools, the local communities. Maybe there would be a way to allocate some of that tax revenue to rural hospitals, which, you know, are degrading rapidly in this country. And so layering in that sort of thing and those benefits into those regions could be seen to be beneficial and accepted, but not by some stakeholders. Some will never accept it. Mm-hmm. And what, you know, we think that, you know, the large tech companies will be doing is there's going to be a presumption against anything other than renewables. And so you'll look at the power needs over a 365-day period, 24/7, and you'll say, well, I think I can do 37% with renewables. I can layer on another 10% with storage, and then I can buy renewables credits. And they're going to be focused on using the minimum with natural gas. Mm-hmm. And I think it'll be that sort of a dynamic, but it makes all the sense in the world if for different states, communities to be doing everything they can to attract this investment to their communities because of the tax and revenue benefits, even if the data centers themselves don't produce a lot of jobs. And again, this load growth dynamic is not just data centers. It's new manufacturing, it's onshoring, it's electrification, it's everything.
I was going to say, I'm trying to think of the state where we're using less power. Like it's just everybody's using more power. It just seems kind of universal.
That's right.
I was thinking I should thank you. You were kind enough to get us the Lazard CEO, Peter Orszag. That was fantastic. We love visiting with him. One of the things that Peter could speak to, given his government experience and also just the Lazard platform, is just attitudes around the world and boardrooms around the world. I'm curious. We always wonder about what's going on in Europe, what's going on in Asia. Like as you think about, and your study goes out, it's like once a year, like, hey, everybody, this is what we're thinking. Just what are you hearing from different parts of the world outside the US and attitudes around power and energy and just anything you'd share there?
I think and you can see this in the way traditional energy stocks trade in the European markets versus the US. You see a big gap between the super majors here and the super majors overseas, and there's a lot of things going on there. But there remains I would say there is, generically speaking, an acceptance of diversity of resource, the enduring nature of traditional energy in the capital markets here, in boardrooms, a lot of focus on whether the relevant company has dealt with its resource planning issues the right way and how this all affects the economics of the relevant business, even if it isn't an energy business. And in Europe, there still is this, there's a much more of an ESG dynamic running through the shareholder base, through stakeholders, and less of a less of an acceptance of all of the need for everything. Although post the Ukraine war, the realization that renewables alone is going to be satisfactory is there just isn't that sense that of a belief that that's going to be satisfactory. And you can see this through in the LNG market and folks looking to procure gas from sources other than Russia and things of that nature.
I was thinking, Lazard, you've always been a firm that's really tuned into geopolitics and politics and just governmental influence on things. We just had some European elections. There feels like there's some change going on, at least even outside the elections. There's geopolitical thinking, but within the elections, there's maybe economic thinking. I guess this is a long way of saying tonight, I know you're hosting a dinner for the women corporate directors and talking a lot about geopolitics. What about that piece of this puzzle right now? What are some of the key themes there?
It's an unstable world. I think the world has always been unstable. It feels particularly unstable right now with the ongoing war in Europe, tensions with China, which are super complicated, and the changeover in governments in Europe exacerbates that. What I would say about, in the context of energy, it highlights the importance of energy security for this country, which goes to having access to a diversity of generation resources, making sure that's secure, making sure we're not dependent on non-US resources, focusing on supply chain, because a lot of what is necessary for producing conventional energy in this country and renewable energy starts with resources or equipment or devices being made in places that are not friendly to the United States. So, this heightened focus on supply chain continues.
Do you think if we toggle hard towards security of supply chain, onshoring, if we just toggle really hard in that direction, and we stay committed to the goals around decarbonization, does that sort of fundamentally imply over the next 10 years we're going to have higher power costs? Like, is that a foregone conclusion? If you do 1 and 2, does 3 necessarily just have to be the case?
I think to affect the transition of the energy resources in this country and continue producing what we produce, we're going to have higher costs. And the decarbonization, there are things we can decarbonize that will be really expensive when we start decarbonizing, that will cost down, just like renewables. So carbon sequestration has a real role to play here. There aren't a lot of case studies for carbon sequestration being deployed here. ADM has long had a carbon sequestration facility in Decatur. We think that that's going to be really interesting for new natural gas-fired generation, and it's not uneconomic, but it's going to be expensive at the beginning. And it's going to be if someone tries to decarbonize the steel industry using whatever they decide to use, that's going to be very expensive at the beginning. So on balance, we would expect power costs to go up. And for something like a gas turbine, there aren't many gas turbine manufacturers in the country. There's global demand for those gas turbines. Mm-hmm. So the supply-demand dynamic there to us suggests, higher costs.
One thing we've been noticing lately, and maybe you see what you're looking for, but it seems like there's more activity happening globally around maybe more natural gas drilling, more oil and gas drilling, returning to exploration, kind of an offshoot of whether it's the developing world or the developed world. We're just going to need more energy, and that'll be a part of the equation. Is that something that you feel as well in your franchise, just activity returning to, international places that we haven't talked about in a while?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'll see much more of it in some companies that are large that have sort of withdrawn from this being a priority from a business perspective, mm-hmm. are going to return to it. And, I saw in Super Spiked over the weekend, that
This is going to make Argent's day or super spike reader.
I read it every Saturday morning. I do. So he talked a bit about the flexibility these companies, generically speaking, will have to grow. And we've thought this for a long time because the world needs the energy and needs the resource. And these companies have been just focused on investing, not at the bare minimum, but investing and really being focused on return of capital. We think the rotation will be to investing in growth, and the shareholders, we think, will be demanding that a bit more and then a bit more. And what's interesting is whether that will translate to some of the large European companies that have been laser focused on buying back stock and returning capital.
We're on investors, and Mike asked this question before about scale, and you got into the diversity and the usefulness of scale. But there's always this classic, like, do what you're good at versus be integrated, do a number of things and capture value across the chain and all those benefits. Like, it seems like we are in a world where bigger will be better, and having a lot of different activities under one umbrella will be the right approach for a lot of reasons. However, it takes away from that, like, look, I'm good at one thing and this is what I do. And the markets usually like that as well and give better valuations to flavors they can understand. I mean, I know that's a big gobbledygook question, but how do you think about reconciling the portfolio approach versus the single flavor and the capital markets?
So I'd say one thing, society should celebrate these large super majors diversifying because they have so much talent inside them and they have the scale and capabilities to solve massive problems and do so economically. And so putting aside what the investors think, it's a good thing that some of these companies are focused on this area because they're going to be able to solve these problems. I believe.
See, I'd tell you a funny comment. I thought you were going to end it with society should celebrate these super majors, but you had to add in some other because I didn't think we were going to get just that.
But I would say
you have to celebrate their ability to do other things. Yeah, is the point.
But they're terrific companies. Beyond this, but I think the investor base is going to tolerate very large companies, so that the super majors continuing to diversify, but probably with a focus on molecules and not electrons, with the exception of one or two of the other companies that are very active in the area and are successful. For other companies that you might put into the lower 48 E&P companies, diversifying is not going to be celebrated. But we think vertical integration will make sense for some of those companies. Vertical integration to lock in margin around their commodity production. And that could be into LNG, that could be into power, but not owning power companies, but selling their commodity to something where the margin can be locked in. So I think the diversification, anti-diversification, really an anti-diversification bent in the capital markets is going to still dominate, but there's going to be much more room for these very large companies to act off their platform and do other things.
Well, it seems like maybe not to split it down the middle, but if you can diversify and show consistent better returns, then you're going to be rewarded.
That's right.
So
that's stating the obvious. Yes,
Mike.
Yeah, George. Maybe I overlooked it, but I didn't see a slide that showed like combined cycle with carbon capture, and maybe it wasn't there, maybe it wasn't. And the only reason I bring that up is because a lot of companies that we know, a lot of our partner companies, they're not building generation because they're looking at the EPA rules. Right now, you have the Chevron deference ruling coming out any day now. You might have a new administration, in the next 6 months or so. How do you think about that? If nothing changes there, are we going to see the natural gas generation growth that you think? Does that mean if we don't see that, prices are just going to go up across the board?
So we had carbon sequestration in our study last year. We didn't include it this year because we were worried about depth of data. And it's not as much of an issue as it is with nuclear, but we think carbon sequestration is going to be really effective. Some very good generating companies in the U.S. are studying it. They own existing plants and could build new plants where the geology is great. Some of the big industrial emitters are in regions of the country with great geology. They should not try to do the subsurface themselves. They should partner with folks who know how to deal with the subsurface to deal with carbon sequestration. So I think that the data over time is going to be very attractive in this area. And this is before we have, a carbon price and things like that, if we ever have one. And so we had it in the study before, but we don't have it now. And then on the tensions in Washington, there's going to be litigation over the EPA regulations. I think the current view in the marketplace is that they're not going to be in effect. And there's an expectation that in the court system or with a new administration, that effort's going to will be preempted, if you will. If there's somehow a block for whatever reason on new gas-fired generation being built here, or moving everything to carbon sequestration, it's going to increase the value of existing natural gas assets and should increase the cost of power because we're not able to deal with the demand.
That judgment, that market judgment that it's not going to happen, is that a sort of a legal overreach type judgment, or is just like practically speaking, even if the rule was implemented, we're not going to do that?
It's both. I think it's both. I think it would be kind of shocking to the system if all of a sudden the reality was that is the law.
It's fascinating because it's the market belief, but who's going to allocate capital in the face of, hey, I'm betting the rules change. It's just a fascinating dynamic.
One of the other things that I was thinking about too is, one of the criticisms is, levelized cost is like, it doesn't include everything, right? And one of the things that was interesting is our conversation beforehand where you're saying it's getting so hot in Arizona, you're having some migration of a population and industry and stuff of that nature. And I would go to Warren Buffett in his annual newsletter basically said that we're going to have to relook at our electric utilities because they could be bankrupt overnight because of wildfires. And I guess when we're seeing some of these co-ops are not able to get insurance or either, how is that going to affect costs, and how is that going to affect utilization, and how is that going to affect just getting stuff built if you just can't get somebody to insure this, either at the public utility level or at the co-op level?
Yeah, there's a problem with insurance. There's also a problem with cost of capital for these utilities in these states where you have wildfire risk, and people randomly pick the west of the Mississippi River, but there's wildfire risk in other places. And it's interesting because when there was a lot of discussion around this over the last few months, and there's some sense of comfort around the California utilities. There's a lot of wildfire risk there, but some sense of comfort because there was legislation passed to deal with the wildfire risk, and those utilities had gotten really, really good at dealing with wildfire risk. And Cal Fire, the fire agency in California, is really good at dealing with wildfire risk. And the maintenance of these systems have changed to deal with wildfire. And then no one worried about the gas LDCs around wildfire risk. So I think this is going to be an ongoing problem, as is climate resiliency. So we're sitting here in Houston, and you kind of look from here to around the Gulf and up the Atlantic, and much more storm risk, much more awareness of storm risk. And you can look at the state of Florida that is a case study for supporting investment to ensure the ongoing functioning of the economy. And so the next era people, Florida Power and Light, several years ago did a study for the regulators that said if we have a Category 4 storm and we have this investment in the system, we will be out for X days. If we don't have the investment, it's going to be a lot more. And so they had this category, the regulator approved the investment. They had a Category 4 storm and they were out for 2 days, and they did the GDP calculation if they hadn't made the investment, and that GDP benefit exceeded the cost of the investment. Yeah. So there's a number of things like that. But the wildfire topic is quite difficult, and depending on the region you're in, the solution, just turning off the power is very impractical. Right. And so there needs to be investment in the system in a way that is relevant for the particular region. Right.
just going to take a little bit of a step back. I mean, this has been, it's just interesting. This is a fantastic branding tool for Lazard. You're now, decade and a half plus into doing it. How does the firm use it? Has it changed, how the firm approaches, deep industry knowledge in other sectors? I'm just curious because it's just it's different. And I think it's been a really useful tool for you guys.
So it's we've done thought pieces like this, Lazard over time. And we have a CEO who's very focused on depth and quality of thinking. He's an academic by background, and we want to produce things that are useful from a content perspective for our clients, whether it's around an individual transaction or things like this. What we do with this study is useful for it is something that has an effect on our brand. A lot of people are interested in it. It's read a lot on the internet. People comment on it, and it benefits us. But what I like about it is it's something that is not the typical pedestrian investment banking transactional thing. It's something where we're having impact. It's cited everywhere. People debate it. It's caused there to be a lot of intellectual debate around the generation stack and things of that nature. We talk to governments about it. We talk to university students about it. My team has high engagement with our work, partly because we produced this study. So that's what I would say about it. But I think it's a good thing, given the heritage of our brand, to do a lot of things like this. And it doesn't have to trace to transactional revenue. It can just be something that has a benefit, and then it ultimately makes our firm stronger.
I was thinking about it. Mike referenced it. The question in the room around the study has so much depth, so much knowledge, and everybody looks forward to getting it every year. The question is always this: it's a marginal cost analysis versus a systemic analysis or a base load. That's always the debate. I was curious, though, in the history of it, didn't it start, you'll tell me, but I assumed it kind of started as we're watching the new flavors of energy and how they're changing. And we're particularly interested in how much it costs to get solar or wind up and running and make a unit of power. And that's, I think, how it became this. Tell me how much it costs to make one more unit of power. I didn't ask how much it costs to make 24/7. That was never the question. Is that part of why the orientation of the report is what it is?
So the starting point, so you've got it. The starting point for the study was in the 2000s. We were talking to all these solar manufacturing companies, and then also the California utilities, but others. And company X would say our stuff is the best. Company Y would say, no, our stuff's the best.
This still happens.
Yeah, I know. and then particularly solar thermal versus PV. So I said, we can't give advice. We need to understand this to talk to our clients. So I said, there must be some way to do this like apples to apples. And so we compared solar thermal to PV. And what came out of the PV study was we looked at the cost composition and we said, those costs are going way down. Solar thermal is not going way down. These are big, complicated enterprises. And we said, we think PV is going to be really dominant. And we looked at two different concepts, two different technologies, and we could see the costs going down. And it's, that's how it started. And then we layered in wind. We used this, we did some work with the federal government around some of their loans into solar companies. And we use this work product to give advice on the viability of different solar companies and things like that. So that's how it started. I think we will do something which is a 24/7 comparison. So people can look at what it costs to stack. It'll be a little bit like this energy storage study we do, where we stack the revenue sources around the different storage project, but we'll do it around individual sites across the country. What's the cost of 24/7 power?
I mean, I think the context is so helpful because these are definitely my words, not yours, but it kind of started as the battle of intermittent superstars. Like, who's got the best in this category? And then when you take that and start adding in other categories, it's, you know, it starts to lose some of the original context.
Yep.
Oh, very interesting.
Yep.
Well, we're almost at the end of the time. We always have so much fun talking to you, George. What do you think about the next 6 months and the types of things you'll be getting involved with, your group will be doing? Like, we're living week to week lately with news and all kinds of things, but what's on your radar for the rest of the year as you're just thinking out loud about the team?
So we one of our favorite things to do, because of the way our group is constructed, is to be able to talk to a leader at some company. It could be a lower 48 E&P company, a utility, super major leader, about what's going on across the whole energy spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, an important company in the what's an important company in the Middle East doing? What's an important pool of capital doing?
Mm-hmm.
That's interested in infrastructure? What is, you know, a large utility doing? What is a large European offshore wind company doing? And to us, this whole energy spectrum all kind of blends together, bleeds together. People are doing different things, but it's all part of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the topic we really like to talk to our clients about.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a lot of transaction activity in the industry, a lot of capital being formed to invest in the industry. That'll continue. We don't think the presidential election will have much impact on this sector and activity in the sector, because, you know, the trends are really unrelated to politics. And, you know, we're not anticipating any super material change to the IRA. The biggest issue would be is if people became so uncertain about the foundation upon which investing is taking place,
Mm-hmm.
as they were before the IRA was passed, you could get some freezing of activity. And then we live in this white hot geopolitical world.
Mm.
So that is something that is a wild card for everything that we're doing. But, you know, we're looking forward. We just are always trying to lean in this industry and help folks out. And that's what we'll keep doing.
I'm tempted that geopolitical thing at the last. You guys do have this group that thinks so much about those issues. A lot of defense, military, you know, unique individuals in that group for you. Are there geopolitical risks on your board that maybe aren't on the rest of our boards? Meaning, we all talk about Taiwan, and, you know, there's various obvious places, but are there some other geopolitical risks that we're not talking about that we should be?
No, I can't think of anything in particular that isn't being, you know, covered robustly. I mean, we've put out our geopolitical advisory team has put out a number of studies about the impacts of the different elections that are taking place, the changeover in Mexico. But these are all pretty well discussed topics. I can't think of anything that is nuanced in the area. It's really the mosh pit of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
That is, you know, what we're focused on. You know, I think those are the things that we have in mind, but it's sort of everything.
We're going to go with the mosh pit of complexity. That's pretty risky.
That's right.
You know, well, George, we really appreciate our friendship with you, the dialogue, the partnership. It's great. And this is your second show with us going through the report. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's great. You have a great firm. It's a really unusual and distinctive organization. And, you know, we love to contribute to it. So
no,
thank you for the time.
You're too kind. Thanks, everybody.